Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, we're doing what I like to call the 3 levels of Gibson. So we're going to be taking a look at an Epiphone Les Paul Standard 50s, a Gibson Les Paul Standard 50s, and a Gibson Custom 1958 Les Paul Standard. Basically what we're going to do, there will be some playing, but we're going to just talk about the differences between both. It's not going to be completely in-depth or anything like that. It's just going to sort of be a generic thing, just so you can kind of get an idea of why there is such a cost difference between the two, or the three, and I'm going to agree with you. I wish they were cheaper. Okay, so first and foremost, I understand that when you have Epiphone and another guitar brand in the same thumbnail, people just start to get absolutely upset and they start to blame you for the downfall of the Guitar Society. I promise you, I don't care what one you buy. As long as you like it, I'm happy. And I'm not going to tell you one's better than the other. And I'm not going to say you have to buy this because of this reason. And I really don't care. If you go and buy the Epiphone or the Gibson or the Custom, as long as you bring it home and you keep playing it, that's really the best thing for me. Also, there's chapter markers here. So if you look at the bottom of the video, you'll actually be able to skip ahead to certain parts. So basically, if you don't like watching or listening to people talk, especially me with my really weird voice, and I'm also getting over being sick, so this might be a different one. So basically, the way that you look at it, if you want to skip ahead just to the sound samples because you're only here to validate a purchase, use the chapter markers, go right over to the audio sound samples, and then just go like, I bought this because I like it. It sounds best in this sample. Cool. So I'm going to start out with what I like to do is like a little bit of a blanketed coverage for all 3 guitars here. So we already know Epiphone, Chinese-made polyurethane finish on them. The woods that are used, they use veneers on the front and the back. If they don't use a veneer, it's because it's a solid color. The reason they do that is so they hide what actual wood they're using. And as well the amount of wood. So generally what I've found so far, if you're looking at the back of that Epiphone, you'll see where the veneer ends, and if you look at the bottom of the guitar, you can usually see how many pieces of wood are there. The Gibson USA, made in USA. It has gloss nitro finish. It is a thicker nitro finish than is on the Gibson Custom Shop. Some people like that, some people don't like that. Because it's made in the US, that automatically increases costs. The wood that they use, they have certain, how would you put it? There's a certain quality and certain factors that go into what wood they're using. It is sourced wood. There can be a little more variance on the Gibson USA than the Gibson Custom because of that. Basically, if they get like a single piece of mahogany for an SG that doesn't meet spec for the Gibson Custom, you can actually go to the Gibson USA and they can then make a single piece Gibson USA SG. It's great. Typically, what you're looking at here, it's real maple cap, so that's real 2-piece maple cap. But the bodies are generally 2-piece mahogany bodies. The Gibson Custom, again, we're looking at now, it's in a different building in the USA than the Gibson USA factory, right? So we now have a specialized building. Within that is actually the Murphy Lab. So it gets a little crazier if you're going with a Murphy Lab. This one here is not, it's just a VOS. They call that now Vintage Original Sheen. That has to do with the finish. It used to be Vintage Original Specification. They hold a copyright for it, but they don't use that anymore. They haven't used that since 2018, I believe. Maybe 2019. They've had Vintage Original Stock, Vintage Old Stock. They've used a whole bunch of things for VOS, but now VOS stands for the finish. Vintage Original Sheen. So that is a lighter nitro finish. So it kind of gives that vintage patina, which is what they used to call it when it was vintage original specification. So again, we're looking at a specialty building with specialty workers. So that's automatically going to increase the cost. We're looking at single piece mahogany backs and graded 2-piece maple tops. So for the 58 that I'm going to show here, it's supposed to be a plain top. So it is a plain top that is going in there, but it is graded, so you can actually see some different type of figuring in there. As well, the 59s are going to be a lot more figured, and the 60s are going to be a lot more figured as well. The 57 is a gold top, so that is colored differently, obviously. And as well, the last thing I want to talk about with the Gibson Custom is the fact that they're using aniline dye on the back. So that like reddish color that you're seeing, like the SG red and stuff, on the back is aniline dye. They have to have their own room for it, and it has to wait to be cured. Otherwise, it'll actually leach onto other guitars. So that's the blanketed kind of coverage for all three. So we know Chinese, US, specialty US. Good enough? Poly, gloss, lighter gloss nitro. Good enough? Good. So here's the Epiphone. So again, we're looking at a veneer here and a veneer here. But we do have a slab mahogany back. Again, this one here is 3 pieces glued together. So they glue the wood together and then they cut out the shape. On top of that, they have a carved maple top. Again, veneer. I'm not quite sure if they use multiple maple or if it's just the two. I'm not sure at all. I can't really tell. The Gibson USA here, slab mahogany body. It is a 2-piece. And then we have a carved maple top on here. Again, 2-piece, and it's a center seam. Means the seam actually runs down the center of the body. So this is actually real maple that's in here, so it's not a veneer. And this was a limited edition that actually has a AAA flame, so it's a higher grading of a flame. That's why it's so wide and deep. The Gibson Custom here, single piece slab mahogany body. It is, like I said, graded, so it has to meet a certain spec for weight and how it actually looks. And the front here is a plain maple top, so it is a real, real pieces of maple that are put together, and it still has that center seam. I'm also realizing at this moment I may have been lazy and I might not have used B-roll for the 1958. So the B-roll that you're seeing is probably from the 1959. They're the same guitar, they just have a different neck and, like plain top to highly figured. The neck for the Epiphone is a mahogany neck. There is a joint that actually joins it into the body, so it sticks out here. And then there is a scarf joint here for where they attach the headstock. The neck pattern here is supposed to be the 59 medium C. However, the 59 medium C actually sticks out a little bit more right at the center of the back here. So it has a little more girth on a 59 medium C. This does not. So this is just a little thicker than a slim taper neck. It is a little noticeable from going from the 60s to the 50s here on the Epiphone, but that is the neck pattern. We also have a bound Laurel fretboard here, and it does not have the fret nibs. One other thing to note here, the standard 50s on the Epiphone side, their specs actually list that this is a long neck tenon rather than a short neck tenon. The Gibson here is a single piece mahogany neck. It is joined into the body via a short neck tenon. There's no joint here and there's no scarf joint here. Also has a bound rosewood fretboard that has the fret nibs, and we have acrylic trapezoid inlays. The neck pattern here, we have the 50s vintage, which is a few millimeters thinner than the baseball bat. So this is sort of like a chunky C neck pattern. The Gibson Custom, once again, is a single piece mahogany neck. It does not have any joints here or scarf joints at the top of the headstock or anything like that. It is joined to the body via a long neck tenon. We also have a bound, albeit with thinner binding, rosewood fretboard. It also has the fret nibs, and I'm going to say this wrong because I'm still getting over being sick. We have the cellulose nitrate or celluloid nitrate. I think it's cellulose nitrate trapezoid inlays that are being used here. That is actually flammable when you're working with it. Doesn't mean if you got a hot solo that the thing's going to light on fire or anything, but it is dangerous to actually work with, so you have to have highly trained individuals to do that. The neck pattern on here is the chunky C neck pattern. It's like maybe a millimeter thicker than the standard 50s for Gibson. On the front of the headstock here on the Epiphone, we have the inlaid Epiphone logo with the silk screened Les Paul model logo. The truss rod cover here says standard, and it has the 3 screws that actually go in. And for a nut, we have a Graphtec nut. Finally, the tuners that are being used here are the Epiphone Vintage Deluxe Clouson style tuners. They are modern sizing, so if you want to swap these out for Grovers, you would, or any other like modern size locking tuner, you would have to just drill pilot holes here, but you wouldn't have to like widen the holes like you would if these were vintage sizing. On the front of the headstock for the Gibson, we have the inlaid Gibson logo, the silkscreened Les Paul model logo, and then we have the 2-screw standard truss rod cover. It also comes with a blank truss rod cover if you want to be a little more period correct. The nut that's here is a Graphtec nut, and the tuners that are being used are the Gibson Vintage Deluxe Clouson style tuners. They're just like slightly thicker than the Epiphone ones. Still modern sizing. So same thing, if you want to swap them out, you don't have to widen the holes here. On the front of the headstock for the Gibson Custom, we have the inlaid Gibson logo. Again, still cellulose nitrate, or aged cellulose nitrate, so flammable when working with it. We have a period correct Les Paul model logo here. And as well, the truss rod cover is sourced material. So this truss rod cover, even though it's a blank, is a little more expensive than the other ones, and it's still 2 screws, but the screws have been tarnished and they're aged. The nut that's being used here is a nylon nut. No, it is not like stocking nylon or anything like that. It's actually rigid nylon. Some people like it, some people don't. And the tuners that are being used here are the Clouson Vintage Deluxe tuners. They are vintage sizing. So what that means is if you wanted to, for some reason on a reissue, install like modern size locking tuners on here, you'd actually have to widen the holes because they are too small to fit the new tuning pegs through. On the Epiphone here, we do have CTS potentiometers. They're soldered, however, they're connected to the pickups via quick connect. Also, we actually have two nicer capacitors here. They're a little larger than the normal, like usually on Epiphone you get the little generic red ones. These are upgraded. The Gibson USA here has the CTS audio taper potentiometers. They are hand soldered, and there's sort of like this little harness that's in here. And as well, if you actually look at the capacitor, we have 2 orange drop capacitors. So they're a little bigger than the ones that are in the Epiphone. The Gibson Custom has a CTS audio taper potentiometers, hand soldered. And if you actually look here, it's a lot cleaner, especially than the Epiphone. But we also have the Bumblebee type paper and oil capacitors that are in here. So yeah, definitely much more upgraded capacitors. Pickup wise, the Epiphone here uses the Epiphone ProBucker 2 in the bridge and the Epiphone ProBucker 1 in the neck. Both magnets here are Alnico 2. On the Gibson, we have the Burstbucker 2 in the bridge and the Burstbucker 1 in the neck. Alnico 2 magnet still. And the Gibson Custom here has the Custom Buckers. These are Alnico 3 magnets. And finally, last thing I'll look at here would be the bridge. So all three have two pneumatics. We have the Epiphone lock tone bridge here on the standard 50s. We have 3 saddles going one way, 3 saddles going the other way. I have not had, actually this is the only one I believe that I've had good success with so far without having buzz. Basically, the metals that are used, especially in the screws, are not the greatest material, and over time, sometimes in a matter of days, they actually just start to buzz and vibrate, so you feel that when you're playing, you hear it when you're playing acoustically, and then eventually what happens is you're able to actually move those saddles around with your thumb. So like I say in any video with these, if you want to replace the bridge, it's not expensive to do. You just need to know you need the metric sizing. Imperial sizing would work for the Gibson. So the Gibson here has the ABR1 bridge. So you have 2 saddles going one way, 4 saddles going the other way. The big thing here is that it is going through like a metal dowling, metal bushing system going into the body. So some people get a little upset over that because, you know, we pay a lot of money for these Gibson USA guitars, and the feeling is, you know, we're paying so much, it should be drilled directly into the body, like the Gibson Custom. So the Gibson Custom, we also have an ABR1. This is an upgraded ABR1, so it has nickel-plated brass saddles, and as well, it is drilled directly into the body with the belief that, you know, that will increase sustain, vibration, stuff like that. So that's really, in a nutshell, the specs. I mean, I could go into higher detail, and I have. So if you want to look at those videos, I'll link them in the description down below. But there's just too much to go into when it comes to details for the Gibson Customs, because all of the parts, like the knobs and stuff like that, there's increased value in there that are added because it's just they're getting specialty plastics and stuff like that. So a lot of those things, whether it means something to you or not, would be, you know, why you might look at the custom shop over the USA or the Epiphone. A lot of that stuff, like, you know, amount of wood, amount of glue, the glue that's being used. So I believe the Epiphone uses Titebond just like the Gibson, but the Gibson Custom reissues use hide glue that crystallizes, and it's supposed to fuse the wood together a little more so it increases vibrancy, but that's a tinfoil hat thing. I think it does, because really, to me, the custom shop reissues just ring out as one freaking piece of wood. But yeah, I mean, that's it. I could go into the case situation, like the Epiphone comes in a cardboard box. The Gibson comes with a Gibson hardshell case and some case candy and there's actually like a polish cloth and a tool, like a multi-tool that your wife will steal from you, or you'll find it in the kitchen every now and then. The Gibson Custom comes with, I always say it wrong, the Lifton case. I don't know why I keep saying Plimpton. Lifton 5-latch case. So sort of like period correct and stuff. And it actually comes with the booklet for a certificate of authenticity, and like you're paying for that, and you're paying for a whole bunch of different things, like you know, you're paying for like reissue hang tags and stuff like that, and you're like, these are the strings that are on your guitar, and like, how much did I pay for that little hang tag that says it uses the Gibson vintage strings and stuff. So there is a lot to be said from Epiphone to Gibson USA to Gibson Custom. You're not in the wrong if you want to own and play either one of them. If you're in the wrong, it's just because you bought it and you don't like it. If you don't like it and you still have it, maybe you're in the wrong. But if you like it and you brought it home and you're still playing it, that's awesome. All right, so the last thing I want to do here, and I have to use notes. this is where, like, if you skipped ahead, just so you can validate a purchase, so you can say, yeah, I like this one, I bought that one, I like it, I own this one. Cool. I do have some notes here just to help you for, before you hear each one, so you can kind of look for what you should be listening for, I guess. And even then, it may not matter to you. Like, a lot of this stuff, like, it may matter to some people, may not matter to other people. So I'm going to start off with the first one, which is on the neck pickup with the volume dialed back to 8 and the tone dialed back to 6. So the big thing here is the Epiphone and the Gibson Custom have 50s wiring. The Gibson USA has modern wiring. So what that ends up doing is, with the modern wiring, if you start to dial back on your volume, you'll start to notice that the tone starts to darken. But if you have that volume on stun, and then you start to dial back your tone, the volume stays the same. When it comes to 50s wiring, there's when you start to dial back on the volume, your tone doesn't darken. So like you still retain a lot of that top end. But when you start dialing back on that tone and your volume's set to stun, it'll start to decrease the volume a little bit. Sometimes it cleans things up. Most times that works perfectly. Sometimes you might want to increase the overdrive or the gain on the amp. So the first one here, for the Epiphone, I have sounds cleaned up, retaining that top end because of 50s wiring. Seems to be a little more emphasis on the low end. It comes across as a little too deep. The emphasis notes, when bent, are missing a lot of that snap. The Gibson USA sounds very muddy, and we retain a lot of that overdrive signal from the amp due to the modern wiring. The emphasis notes with bends are all overdrive and low end. This seems closer to what people refer to as the woman tone. The Gibson Custom cleaned up, retaining a lot of that top end, again because of the 50s wiring. The response here seems to be a little more balanced without a ton of low end. This gives the emphasis notes with bends a little more snap and oomph. The next sound sample here is bridge, so we're on the bridge pickup. The Epiphone is lacking a bit of volume and seems to be cleaning up the signal a little bit. Pickup heights were all matched with a string gauge ruler. So yes, if you are curious, whenever I do comparisons and stuff like that, I use this to make sure that the pole pieces are all the same height. The emphasis notes here don't hit as much as you are missing some of that top end. The Gibson USA, we are starting to get a little more volume, and the overdriven signal is shining through from the amp. The mid-range can somewhat sound like there is a wah on in comparison to the Epiphone. So basically, like, you got a wah like this or so. Not all the way, but you know what I mean? A little like that. Just when you hear one from the other. The Gibson Custom retaining that overdrive signal from the amp. There's also a nicer top end in this signal, which really helps the emphasis notes. Next sound sample here is on the middle, so middle position. Epiphone seems to be lacking definition on the open A and then on the slide notes. It's also a little on the thin side. Gibson USA, you can hear from the open A that it is sounding much fuller, and it does sound a touch hotter as well. The Gibson Custom, very full sound. The overdrive signal seems to be a little more dialed back in comparison to the Gibson USA. Sound sample here is neck. No dialed back volume or tone or anything. The Epiphone seems to be a little hotter with a little too much top end to it. The Gibson USA seems to be a little more reserved, and that top end is starting to come down, so you're able to hear a bit more of the overall frequencies and definition. The Gibson Custom, much more reserved in comparison to the Gibson USA. Not hot at all. The emphasis note seems to be sounding clearer and clearer as we switch guitars. That's it for all of the different sound samples and everything. Again, if you're looking for shorter videos, that's just more focused on, like, you know, sound sample here in comparison to each. I did one for the Gibson USA versus the Gibson Custom, the Gibson or the Epiphone versus the Gibson, and then the Epiphone versus the Gibson Custom as well. So I'll leave the links in the descriptions, and if you want the longer form of the what's the difference between this guitar and that guitar, I'll leave that link there as well. For each, I did for each. However, the one from the Epiphone to the Gibson Custom, I actually used the 1959, because in my mind they kept calling it a 1959 medium C neck, so I was like, I'll use the 59. Anyway, I can't reiterate enough how much I do not care which guitar you own and which guitar you have. I don't look down on you if you own the Epiphone. I don't look up to you if you have the Gibson Custom. It's you play what you want to play, and as long as it, you know, gives you that feeling of it's you and your guitar against the world, you can't go wrong. Thanks for watching.